18 attack helicopters, parked in neat rows, fueled, armed, and ready for the morning sortie. Then the horizon lit up. This is the story of how a single Ukrainian deep strike drone operation took apart one of Russia's most lethal close air support assets. Not over the battlefield, but on the tarmac where those aircraft slept. And how one carefully planned night changed the math of air power along the entire southern axis of this war. I'm your host at EastAlert, where we analyze the battles that change wars. Stay with me. What you're about to hear is not a story about luck. It's a story about patience, precision, and the kind of strategic thinking that separates a modern military from a Soviet-era relic trying to fight a 21st century war. Let's start with the problem. Along the contact line between Zaporizhia and the southern Donetsk axis, Ukrainian armored units had been dealing with the same nightmare for months. Every time a column tried to advance, every time engineers pushed forward to clear a lane, every time infantry massed for an assault, Russian attack helicopters appeared over the tree line within minutes. Ka-52 Alligators, Mi-28 Havocs, twin-engine, heavily armored, carrying Vickers anti-tank missiles with a range of 8 kilometers. These were not improvised weapons. They were purpose-built tank destroyers, and they were extraordinarily effective against exposed Ukrainian armor. The math was brutal. A single Ka-52 sortie could engage a Ukrainian armored column from beyond the range of most man-portable air defense systems. The Vickers missile travels at 400 meters per second and carries a tandem warhead designed to penetrate reactive armor. Against a Bradley fighting vehicle or even a T-64, the result was fire and silence. Against a Ukrainian engineer unit clearing mines in the open, it was a massacre. Ukrainian commanders had adapted. They dispersed formations. They moved at night. They used tree lines and irrigation channels as cover. They deployed mobile SHORAD teams, short-range air defense units with Stinger missiles and German-supplied Gepard anti-aircraft gun systems. These measures reduced losses, but they didn't eliminate the threat, because the helicopters kept coming back. Every morning, before dawn, they lifted off from their base. Every evening, they returned, refueled, rearmed. And the next day, they came back to the same stretch of front, hunting the same Ukrainian units. Ukrainian General Staff intelligence analysts understood that this was not a problem you solve by shooting down individual helicopters over the battlefield. Every Ka-52 destroyed in the air was replaced within weeks from deeper Russian inventory. The supply chain was intact. The crews were rotated. The mission continued. You solve this problem by going to the source. The source was a Russian airbase deep inside Russian territory. Well beyond the reach of conventional Ukrainian artillery, well beyond the patrol range of Ukrainian fighter aircraft operating under constant threat from Russian air defense systems. Russian military planners considered it completely safe. Not relatively safe, completely safe. The kind of safe that breeds complacency. The kind that causes maintenance crews to work in the open during daylight. The kind that lets helicopter pilots walk calmly to their aircraft in the warm evening light, chatting, carrying their helmets loosely at their sides with no particular urgency. That sense of safety was about to become the most expensive mistake in the history of that facility. The Ukrainian Main Intelligence Directorate, the GUR, had been studying the base for months, not weeks. Months. The intelligence effort had begun long before anyone started building the strike packages. Satellite imagery from commercial providers, supplemented by data from Western intelligence partners, gave analysts a detailed picture of the facility's layout. They knew where the helicopters were parked. They knew the refueling points. They knew the ammunition storage areas. They knew the maintenance hangars. They knew the patterns. Patterns were everything. Russian military installations, despite periodic attempts to enforce operational security, fall into routines with remarkable consistency. Crew shifts change at predictable times. Refueling operations happen on a schedule. The window between the last evening's sortie and the lighting of perimeter security was consistent to within 20 minutes across dozens of observed days. 20 minutes was more than enough? Which weapon was deadlier in this operation? The loitering munition that found the target? The electronic intelligence that identified the pattern? Or the planning that put everything together at the right moment? Comment below. A for the drone, B for the intelligence, C for the planning. The answer matters more than you might think. The strike package GUR planners assembled was not a single weapon system. It was a layered operation involving multiple drone types, coordinated timing, and a deliberate sequencing of objectives that reflected a real understanding of how airbase infrastructure actually works. The primary strike vehicles were Ukrainian-developed long-range loitering munitions, systems built on lessons from 2 years of full-scale warfare. Ukraine doesn't just use weapons. Ukraine invents new ways to fight. These systems combined commercial drone airframes with military-grade navigation, pre-programmed GPS waypoints, inertial navigation for GPS-denied environments, and terminal optical guidance for final target acquisition. They were not off-the-shelf items. They were the product of Ukrainian engineers working in dispersed workshops under constant threat of Russian strikes, designing weapons to fight a war that no pre-war doctrine had anticipated. Range: sufficient to reach the target with fuel margin to spare. Warhead: a shaped charge optimized for penetrating the thin upper armor of parked rotary wing aircraft and triggering secondary explosions in fuel systems. Flight profile: terrain following at low altitude to defeat radar detection, rising to attack altitude only in the terminal phase. The secondary elements of the package were FPV drones carried closer to the border on commercial vehicles, then launched from forward positions to exploit any gaps in Russian radar coverage created by the primary approach vector. And behind everything, not firing a shot, was a layer of electronic intelligence assets monitoring Russian air defense communication frequencies for any sign that the primary wave had been detected. Stay with me. What happens in the next sequence destroys not just helicopters, but the entire concept of sanctuary that Russian military planners had built their southern air campaign around. The launch sequence began under a sky with no moon. Operators at dispersed launch sites across a wide arc of Ukrainian-controlled territory received the execute orders simultaneously. No radio communication at the moment of launch. The signal had been pre-coordinated, timing synchronized to the second using encrypted digital systems. 43 drones lifted into the night air within an 11-minute window. 43. The number mattered. Russian air defense coverage around the base was not absent. This was not an undefended facility. Pantsir S-1 short-range air defense systems were emplaced at the perimeter. Radar pickets. Duty crews awake and nominally alert. Ukrainian planners had factored all of this in. The solution was geometry. 43 drones approaching from multiple vectors. Not a single stream that air defense radar could track and engage sequentially, but a distributed constellation arriving from 7 different compass bearings within a compressed time window. The Pantsir system, capable and lethal against small aerial targets in isolation, has fundamental limitations when faced with saturation from multiple simultaneous directions. Its radar dwells on a target. It acquires. It fires. That process takes seconds. When targets are arriving faster than the engagement cycle, the math stops working in the defender's favor. But here is where the obstacle entered the picture. 14 minutes before the first drones reached the base perimeter, GUR's electronic intelligence monitors detected a change in Russian air defense communication patterns. Something had shifted, not a full alert. No indication that the drones themselves had been detected. But a frequency change in one of the Pantsir units suggesting a crew rotation was happening earlier than the established pattern predicted. The window was compressing. The operations team running the mission had pre-established decision rules for exactly this contingency. If Russian air defense posture changed by more than a defined threshold before primary strike units reached their attack positions, there were 2 options: abort and recover what could be recovered, or accelerate the timing sequence for the secondary wave to create earlier pressure on the air defense systems. Abort meant losing the entire operation and potentially compromising months of intelligence work as Russian analysts tried to understand why 43 drones had lifted off and turned back. Accelerate meant the secondary FPV wave would be in the engagement zone before the primary strike had fully developed. A coordination risk, but one that would force Russian air defense operators to deal with threats at multiple ranges simultaneously. The decision came back in 40 seconds. Accelerate. The FPV wave pushed forward. The primary strike continued on its approach vector, terrain following through dark fields and sleeping villages, guided by inertial navigation and the quiet certainty of pre-programmed coordinates. The Russian crew completing their rotation at the Pantsir site had no idea what was inbound. The frequency change Ukrainian electronic intelligence had detected was not tactical alertness. It was an administrative matter. The outgoing crew was logging their shift completion. The incoming crew was initializing their system. There was a window, brief, routine, and in any other context completely unremarkable. when the system was in transition mode. That window aligned with the outer edge of engagement range for the first arriving drone. It passed through. How many helicopters did Ukraine destroy in this operation? We'll give you the answer before this ends. For now, A, 7, B, 14, C, all 18 on the tarmac. Lock in your answer. The first impact registered on Russian perimeter sensors at the exact moment the third drone was already inside the facility boundary. The sequencing had worked. The Pantsir crews, now alert and scanning, found themselves looking at contacts ranging from 2 kilometers down to 400 meters simultaneously. The engagement computer flagged priorities. The crews tried to work through them. They could not work fast enough. The first helicopter to take a hit was a Ka-52 parked at the head of the eastern row, the lead aircraft of the morning's planned first sortie, fully fueled. Maintenance had signed off on it 6 hours earlier. Its weapons pylons carried 4 GUR missiles and a full load of 30 mm cannon ammunition. When the shaped charge penetrated the fuselage and detonated adjacent to the fuel cell, the result was not just the destruction of one aircraft. It was the beginning of a chain reaction that Russian planners had never modeled in their facility vulnerability assessments, because those assessments had been built on the assumption that this base was beyond Ukrainian reach. The fire spread laterally. The heat cooked off the cannon ammunition on the second aircraft before the strike drone assigned to it had even reached its attack position. The secondary explosion knocked out perimeter lighting along the eastern taxiway. Russian responders moving toward the fire found themselves operating in darkness. Subscribe to EastAlert if you want to understand how modern warfare actually works. Not the version diplomats describe, but the version engineers, drone operators, and tactical planners actually live. The western row was struck 4 minutes later. By that point, Russian base defense had activated, and 2 Pantsir systems were actively engaging inbound threats. They achieved intercepts. Ukrainian mission planners had expected intercepts. The 43 drone package had been sized to absorb expected attrition from an active Pantsir response and still deliver sufficient munitions to the target set. 12 drones were intercepted or destroyed by countermeasures. 31 continued. 31 was more than enough. The ammunition storage area received 3 separate impacts within 90 seconds. The first penetrated the roof of a maintenance shed adjacent to the primary storage building. The second hit the vehicle access point to the storage compound. The third, the one Ukrainian mission analysts would later study most carefully in post-strike assessment, struck the ventilation system of the underground bunker where rocket motor propellant for GUR missiles was stored. The resulting detonation was visible on commercial satellite imagery captured 12 hours later. The scale of secondary explosions is what separates a successful deep strike operation from a symbolic one. Ukrainian planners understood this. Destroying an aircraft on the ground is meaningful. It removes that airframe from the order of battle. But hitting the ammunition depot means the base loses not just its current inventory, but its ability to rearm arriving replacements. The logistics tail is severed. The base becomes a facility that can park aircraft but cannot arm them, which means it cannot generate sorties over the contact line. That was the deeper objective, not 18 helicopters. The supply ecosystem that kept 18 helicopters fighting every day. Intercepted Russian communications in the hours following the strike. Fragments collected by Ukrainian signals, intelligence assets, and later corroborated by OSINT analysis of Russian military social media, painted a picture of an organization in shock. The base commander was trying to establish accountability for personnel status. Medical assets were being requested. Fire suppression teams were reporting they had contained the blaze in the maintenance hangars, but that the ammunition storage complex was a total loss. One intercept, cited in Ukrainian General Staff communications without specific attribution, captured a logistics officer trying to explain to his superior that the resupply timeline for GUR missiles to the affected unit would be measured not in days, but in months. The production bottleneck in the Russian defense industrial base for precision anti-tank guided missiles had already been strained by losses along the entire front. Now, it had to absorb the loss of an entire forward stockpile. Russian air power along the southern axis did not disappear overnight. That is not how military organizations work. Other bases could be tasked. Other units could pick up the sortie requirement. But reallocation takes time, creates gaps in coverage elsewhere, and introduces coordination overhead that degrades overall effectiveness. For Ukrainian armored units along the Zaporizhia axis, the change was noticeable within days. Ground force commanders reported a reduction in helicopter contacts over their operational areas. The window for movement. for pushing forward, repositioning assets, for the thousand small tactical actions that add up to operational progress, widened. If you believe tactics win wars, type EastAlert in the comments. What would NATO planners have done differently? The architecture of this strike followed doctrinal principles that Western military analysts will recognize: target system analysis, sequencing to achieve cascading effects, redundancy in the strike package to absorb expected attrition. But NATO doctrine would typically have added a suppression of enemy air defense component using dedicated aircraft armed with anti-radiation missiles, weapons that home on radar emissions and destroy the emitting system. Ukraine, operating without unrestricted air access deep into Russian territory, couldn't use that element. The workaround: saturation through numbers and geometric distribution, was an improvisation born of constraint. It worked. Comment your analysis of what, if anything, could have been done differently with different tools. The GUR's post-strike assessment, conducted using satellite imagery analysis, signals intelligence review, and combat footage verification from drone assets tasked for battle damage assessment, established the following picture. 14 of the 18 helicopters parked at the base were assessed as destroyed or severely damaged beyond field repair. 2 more sustained damage requiring depot-level maintenance, meaning they would be out of the operational cycle for an extended period. The remaining 2 were in maintenance bays during the strike and sustained heat and blast damage of varying severity. 14 primary airframes, 16 if you count the maintenance cases. The ammunition storage complex was assessed as a complete loss. Estimates placed the value of destroyed ordnance, GUR missiles, rockets, cannon ammunition, and associated propellants, at a figure equivalent to several months of production output from the responsible Russian manufacturing facility. The maintenance infrastructure, specialist equipment, technical documentation, calibrated tooling that you cannot simply replace by shipping in a cargo truck, was destroyed in the hangar fires. Replacing it was not a question of money alone. It was a question of industrial capacity and logistics chains already under severe strain. The base would not generate attack helicopter sorties against Ukrainian positions for months. Satellite imagery analysis confirmed the scale of destruction. OSINT investigators working from commercial satellite products documented the spread of fire damage across the facility. Combat footage verification, using drone imagery captured by Ukrainian assets tasked specifically for post-strike assessment, showed the condition of individual aircraft on the tarmac. The numbers were not estimates. They were documented. Ukrainian sources assessed the total value of equipment destroyed: aircraft, ordnance, infrastructure, specialist tooling, at an equivalent purchasing cost that, measured against the cost of the drone strike package itself, represented a return ratio that no conventional military operation could match. 100 to 1 by the most conservative reckoning, possibly higher. This is the economic logic of modern warfare that Russian strategic planners had failed to internalize. When a defender can destroy a $10 million aircraft with a $50,000 drone, the attacker's industrial advantage becomes a liability. Every helicopter Russia sends to the front becomes a target. Every target has a cost. And the cost of losing them is not just financial. It is the combat capability they represent, the sorties they would have flown, the Ukrainian armor they would have destroyed. The Russian response in the days following the strike revealed the depth of the miscalculation. Emergency requests went up the logistics chain for missile resupply. Requests for additional Pantsir systems to reinforce bases that had previously been considered safe generated friction between air defense units already fully committed to protecting frontline areas. Base commanders at other facilities throughout the affected military district implemented new passive defense measures. Dispersal of aircraft, hardened parking revetments hastily constructed from earth-moving equipment, revised crew rotations intended to reduce predictability. Every one of those measures cost time, money, and operational efficiency. Every base that now had to protect itself from Ukrainian deep strike capabilities was a base whose resources were no longer fully directed toward offensive operations. That was the second-order effect, the one that doesn't show up in satellite imagery, the one that doesn't generate dramatic footage, but the one that military analysts count most carefully when they assess whether an operation actually changed something. This operation changed something. The lesson was written in burning wreckage and silent tarmac. Sanctuary is a concept. It holds only as long as the other side lacks the means to contest it. Ukraine, through years of adaptation, had developed those means. The long-range loitering munitions that struck this base were not imported. They were Ukrainian-designed, Ukrainian-built, and Ukrainian-operated. the product of a defense industrial effort conducted under bombardment, with interrupted power, with engineers who had adapted to working in basements and dispersed facilities to avoid precisely the kind of strike they were now delivering to Russian assets. That asymmetry, the improvised against the institutional, runs through this entire war. Russia brought mass, Ukraine brought ingenuity. And night after night, along a contact line stretching more than 1,000 kilometers, ingenuity has been carving away at mass in ways that don't always make headlines, but that accumulate into something that shifts the strategic picture. Now, the answer to the question from earlier: how many helicopters did Ukraine destroy? The answer is B-14, with 2 more severely damaged and effectively out of the cycle. Not all 18 on the tarmac. 2 were in maintenance bays and sustained lesser damage, not 7. The strike package was sized and sequenced to ensure a significantly higher count. 14 airframes, confirmed through satellite imagery analysis and supplemented by signals intelligence, suggesting that the base's maintenance organization was overwhelmed by the damage scope. The 2 maintenance bay aircraft appear in subsequent imagery with what analysts assessed as heat damage, but their operational status in the weeks following the strike was not confirmed. 14 helicopters is roughly 1 full-attack aviation regiment's rotary wing component. That kind of loss takes quarters to rebuild under normal industrial conditions. And Russia's defense industrial conditions are not normal. Western sanctions, export control enforcement, and the cumulative attrition of 2 years of full-scale war have put the Russian helicopter manufacturing and maintenance ecosystem under significant strain. Replacing these airframes in a useful operational timeframe was not simply a matter of issuing a production order. The strategic impact played out over the weeks that followed. Ukrainian armored unit commanders along the Zaporizhia axis reported measurable changes in the air threat environment. Helicopter contact frequency dropped. When contacts did occur, they were briefer, suggesting that replacement crews were operating more conservatively, less willing to push into ranges where man-portable air defense could engage them. The boldness that had characterized Russian attack helicopter operations was replaced by something more cautious. Caution is the shadow that competent deep strike operations cast over everything that follows. Was this the right call? Targeting the base rather than concentrating resources on defeating helicopters in the air over the contact line? Both approaches have doctrinal advocates. Air-to-air and ground-based air defense attrition is the traditional answer to the helicopter threat. The deep strike approach is higher risk, requires more precise intelligence, and has a longer preparation timeline. But its effects, when achieved, are more durable. An aircraft destroyed over the steppe is replaced. An infrastructure complex burned on its own airfield takes months to reconstitute. Could Russia have prevented this? The measures they implemented after the strike, dispersal, hardened revetments, revised patrol schedules, were all available to them before it. The reason they weren't implemented was the assumption of sanctuary. That assumption cost them 14 helicopters and months of close air support capacity along a critical axis. What would you have done differently? As the Ukrainian planner who designed this operation, as the Russian base commander who bore responsibility for its defense, or as the pilot who walked to an aircraft that never flew again? The answers to those questions are where doctrine is actually written. Real tactics, real consequences. EastAlert. Subscribe to EastAlert, because we break down the battles that textbooks will study for decades. The kind of battles where decisions made in planning rooms, months before the first drone lifts off, determine what happens on the tarmac at 3 in the morning. The kind of battles where the difference between sanctuary and catastrophe is a pattern in a shift-change schedule that one side studied and the other side never knew was being studied. The base is quiet now. Some of the wreckage has been cleared. Some of it has not. The scorch marks on the concrete remain. The revetments they built after the strike stand in rows, empty monuments to a lesson learned too late. Somewhere above them, the night sky is empty of the aircraft that used to lift from this place every morning before dawn. Modern warfare punishes the assumption of sanctuary without mercy. Stay vigilant.